Hello. Warriors of Chaos may be one of the most iconic designs in Warhammer history, but where did they come from? With a history that traces back to the very earliest art and miniatures created for Games Workshop, in some cases even before Warhammer Fantasy existed, even before Citadel miniatures existed. The Chaos Warrior has long been the quintessential villain in pretty much every Games Workshop game. Even 40k has its own version of them in the Chaos Space Marines. In this episode, I take a look at some of the earliest examples of, and even earlier influences on, the Chaos Warriors of Warhammer Fantasy. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're building Warhammer Armies, Warriors of Chaos. Building Warhammer Armies is my regular series where I take a look at the origins and evolution of a given faction in Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, or Age of Sigmar. Now, in previous episodes, I have probably delved a bit too greedily and too deeply into that history, and I find that episodes can become very long indeed, and sometimes that results in the later evolutions, the later developments, probably not getting quite as much focus as they deserve. So in this case, I'm just going to be looking at the earliest origins of the Warriors of Chaos. Where did they first come from? How were they first molded into that recognizable form that has plagued the good forces of Warhammer and 40k and Age of Sigmar ever since? If you enjoy this video and want to see more, there's a whole playlist of other episodes, and you can support my work on Patreon if you want early access and exclusive content. So, if we're going to be looking at the origins of Warhammer's Warriors of Chaos, I guess we should start with the early Warhammer releases, right? Well, wrong, because these Chaos Warriors predate Warhammer. They predate even Citadel. We're going to a time before. We are going to Asgard. Asgard Miniatures was founded in 1976 to create metal soldiers, and one of its founders would go on to have a long history with the forces of Chaos. Brian Ansell, the man who co-founded Citadel and later took over Games Workshop, was a chief driving force behind the inclusion of Chaos in the Warhammer world. Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell, creators of the game, drew inspiration from many sources, such as Tolkien, D&D, and the history of our real world. But it was seemingly Ansell who brought Michael Moorcock and his Eternal Champion to the gaming table. Amongst the most important aspects of Moorcock's work that took root in what would become the Warhammer world were the gods of law and chaos in particular, and that balance between them. Even the 8-pointed star of chaos came from Moorcock's work. In the late 70s, before Citadel even existed, Ansell oversaw the release by Asgard Miniatures of ranges called Creatures of Chaos and Barbarians and Chaotix. These miniature ranges included sculpts by later GW legends Nick Bibby, Jez Goodwin, and John Blanche, and they included some minis that are particularly relevant to us, such as this chap called a Warrior of Chaos. John Blanche has talked about designing countless Warrior of Chaos concepts even before Ansell had requested them, and some of those early design ideas were even published in the classic book Heroes for Wargaming. There are some incredible ideas across these spreads, and plenty of features that we would see again in later Chaos Warriors. In my recent interview, John Blanche talked a little bit more about them.
Brian gave me a steady income for 3 days a week, and that's when I started doing concepts for Chaos Warriors and orcs and just loads of stuff. Jez will remember. I can't remember.
In the Heroes for War games, yeah, it's got your pages of sketches, and there's just like countless ideas of different variations, iterations on those, and the Chaos Warrior and different armors and looks. Was that all just like what was influencing that kind of stuff? Was that just from your mind, or were you drawing on inspiration?
I don't know. I've never read Moorcock in my life, so I know nothing about all that stuff, but everybody else seems to feed off it, but I don't know it. I read a few Conan books, but no, real history, real life history. That's what inspires my work. So I'll just give it a bit of a nudge into a fantasy realm from that point. And if you're basing your work on real arms and armour, it gives it a credibility you don't get just by making it up.
From those illustrations and sculpts, it's possible to see what would become the hallmarks of the Warriors of Chaos. Their ornate heavy armour and helmets, their elaborate shields, their horny adornments, if you will. In the early years of Citadel, Brian Ansell would secure the rights to produce a number of licensed miniatures, including a range based on Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion. Much of Moorcock's work exists in a shared multiverse, in which the Eternal Champion is a paladin of balance between the gods of law and the gods of chaos. Some of the most famous novels and short stories in the series include those focused on Elric the Melnibonean and Hawkmoon, both of which played a role in influencing Warhammer and 40k. There were plenty of Eternal Champion miniatures, but the ones that are most relevant to us are probably the Pantang Infantry. Although they might also be said to share some design features with later Dark Elves, their heavy armour, shields, and elaborate headgear may have informed the Warriors of Chaos as well. The rather wonderful Awesome Lies blog has posted an excellent deep dive into the origins of Chaos Warriors, which includes some pertinent extracts from Moorcock's writing about the Warriors of Pantang. I'll just read out one of those extracts here, and I'll include a link to the brilliant blog post in the description below for those interested in finding out more. On his body, scarlet armour glowed as if red hot. On his left arm was a shield of the same stuff, and in his hand a steel sword. He had a narrow aquiline head with a closely trimmed black beard and moustache. On his elaborate helm was the Merman crest of Pantang. It's clear that Michael Moorcock's work played a huge role in informing and influencing the creation of the Warhammer world, in particular the Chaos Gods. In fact, the 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy is dedicated in part to him. But Brian Ansell, in an interview with the Realm of Chaos 80s blog in 2013, explained that when it came to Chaos Warriors specifically, he felt that there was a more powerful influence at work. Certainly, Michael Moorcock was an influence and inspiration. Michael Moorcock and Tolkien cast massive shadows over the whole fantasy industry. In my case, Jack Vance and Clark Ashton Smith were equally important. I don't think our vision of Chaos Warriors overlaps much with that of Michael Moorcock, although we did occasionally borrow his arrow symbol. For me, all the roots of the Chaos Warriors that Citadel made over the years lie with Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer paintings and sketches. The first few Chaos Warriors that Tony Ackland made at Asgard, also the one that Stan Potron made, and John Blanche's sketches from the early 80s. Death Dealer is an iconic piece by the legendary godfather of fantasy art, Frank Frazetta, painted in 1973. Just this one image clearly looms large over the look and feel of Warhammer, particularly Warhammer Chaos. But there are plenty of other ways in which Frazetta's incredible fantasy art would go on to inform the art, writing, and worlds of fantasy that were created by many different artists who came after him. And he would later produce more images of Death Dealer as well, that would collectively inspire their own artworks, comics, and even movies. Just looking at the original, it's hard not to take Ansell at his word. This really does feel like a huge inspiration for the Chaos Warriors to come. The look of the Chaos Warriors was drawing on these many and varied influences, and plenty of pictures that we would recognise as Chaos Warriors appeared in early Warhammer supplements and flyers. But the actual nature of them didn't quite exist just yet. Even when they appeared, they were a little bit different. There was no mention of Chaos or their warriors in the core rulebooks for the 1st edition, despite a Chaos Warrior basically appearing on the cover itself. But in several supplements, there would be plenty of detail and some lovely art, much of it by the brilliant Tony Ackland. Former Games Workshop writer Space McQuirk let me grab some quick photos of his copy of The Quest for Chaos, a scenario that was included in some early miniature boxes for the 1st edition, and which told the tale of another world known as Erysia. This adventure begins as the Chaos Gods summon 10 mighty warriors of chaos. The gods have prepared the way. The spells which protect the mausoleum of Ifram are broken. The elder gods will allow passage over the bridges. Now, if only the warriors of chaos can enter the mausoleum and destroy the Eye Stone, chaos can advance over the crack of desolation, over the mausoleum of Ifram, and over all of Erysia. It's fun to find out that the Crack of Desolation actually predates the Great Unclean One. The Warriors of Chaos were described as dour heroes, once human but strangely transformed by contact with the Chaos powers. They were to be represented in-game by 2 Citadel specialty sets, the first of which was SS1, Champions of Chaos, and the second was SS1 version 2, Warriors of Chaos. Released in 1982, the first ever Citadel specialty set included 9 models with a selection of 12 heads, 12 shields, and 3 weapon options that could be assembled in more or less any combination. This Champions of Chaos box included many of those hallmarks of Chaos Warriors, even featuring a model whose design is likely to feel very familiar to HeroQuest players. A second edition box was later released, which featured single-piece castings rather than the modular sculpts, and it was renamed the Warriors of Chaos box. A couple of notable chaps here include Cardos Bloodhelm, who looks quite reminiscent of Frazetta's Death Dealer to my eye, and this chap called UTHMOG ELVENBANE would later be immortalised by Blanche on the cover of Warhammer, though of course with additional appellative alliteration. In 1983 there would be another specialty set featuring the Warrior Knights of Chaos, 9 mighty warriors pledged to the Dark Gods, including an early appearance in Warhammer for the Chaos God Khorne. Khorne actually debuted with Brian Ansell's Chaos Marauders set, but was featured here amongst a number of other weird and wonderful cults, sects, and religions that the Warrior Knights of Chaos might follow, such as Wenlock the Waylayer and the Unholy Grimace. The first major supplement for the first edition of Warhammer was Forces of Fantasy, which included plenty of expanded information to define and really help you play different factions in the game. Chaos were featured in the books, but there was a lot more focus on the beastmen and general warbands of Chaos than on specific regiments of warriors. This does give rise, though, to one of my personal favourite visions of Chaos: armies of weird and monstrous chaotic creatures led by just a single warrior or champion of Chaos. And, for what it's worth, this Chaos guy riding what looks like a proto-Gryph-hound is pretty darn cool as well. Mention is made in the text of Chaos mutations, though it is suggested that they will be covered in more detail in the forthcoming Realm of Chaos supplement. That supplement was also advertised in 1983's first Citadel compendium, though it wouldn't actually be released for another 5 or so years. Fortunately, that same compendium did include an early system for granting the gifts of the Ruinous Gods, the Marks of Chaos, which was not unlike the RuneQuest system for chaotic features. These attributes could be rolled up for pretty much any type of creature, but as you might expect, there would be a marginally higher chance for a champion or servant of chaos to receive a gift. Anything from great fangs to prehensile tails to an unusually long neck. In the second edition core box, there would be a battle bestiary, which would include chaos, this time with fluff far more familiar. Warriors of Chaos, like beastmen, are servants and worshippers of the foul chaos gods. They also swept inexplicably from the north during the times when the incursions of chaos were most active. Together with other chaotic creatures, they came out of nowhere and broke upon the lands of Norsca and the Old World. Even now, over 100 years later, bands of black-armoured chaos warriors still raid the north of the Old World. Warriors of Chaos are humans, men who have devoted their lives to the gods of chaos. Any human can become a warrior of chaos if properly tutored and initiated, although the warriors of chaos who come from the north are not men of the known world. And Ravening Hordes, which was similar to Forces of Fantasy but for the second edition of Warhammer, would also include new entries for chaos. This time it would introduce not so much an evolution, that's the wrong word, maybe more of a mutation. In this art, we can see the effects of such a chaos mutation, gifted by the gods to a devoted warrior. Interestingly enough, though, the core range of chaos warriors didn't really feature many mutated miniatures for the first few years. All of the different chaos warriors to this point were consolidated into a single range, C35, which featured chaos champions, chaos knights, and chaos warriors. It wouldn't be until the Realm of Chaos was released that those gifts of the gods became more obviously visible on a fully updated range of warriors, sorcerers, and champions. One side note that I will mention is that this early era of the Chaos Warriors also included undead champions and worshippers, such as the advertised but unreleased Skeleton Guardsmen of Chaos specialty set. This tradition might even be considered to be echoed in the famously Skeletonian warrior of Chaos called Krell. The skellies on screen are actually from the Stuff of Legends collection, which is where I've also sourced some of the other images for this video, and for other videos on my channel. It's an amazing site, and I fully recommend that you go check it out and support it if you're a fan of early Citadel history. In a June 1985 flyer, the C35 range is shown off in all its glory, and there are some marvellous minis here. I'm a big fan of Grim Jack, and the somewhat sheepish-looking Axe Lord, who wears a very wide-eared hat. There's also some oddities in this collection, such as the Crossbow of Chaos, a female Vixen warrior, and a Chaos Archer. By the time of the 1987 C35 update, things were a lot closer to the chaotic uniformity we might expect from these warriors. Designed by Ali Morrison, Bob Naismith, and the Perry twins, these boys are fully covered in horns, spikes, and fancy loopy bits. There is still that hint of Eternal Champion Pantang, and the original Blanche illustrations can be seen in here as well. But by now, they've fully become their own Warhammerian thing. I think that personalities like Nud Spinespittle and Count Metalmane may have been fun to keep around for later editions. There is, though, an appearance from Deathscar, who would become one of the cover models for the 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer's Warriors of Chaos really have existed since time immemorial. This is a threat that predates even the Warhammer world itself, drawing on inspiration from Frank Frazetta and Michael Moorcock, and filtering it through the minds of John Blanche, Tony Ackland, Brian Ansell, and many others. The Warhammer Warriors of Chaos have become something so iconic, and it's almost no surprise. The very first box sets featured Warriors of Chaos, and they've been in the art the entire time. They really are Warhammer through and through. They just run through the entire background from before there was even a Warhammer world. Chaos has always existed, just waiting to take it over. It feels obvious now that Games Workshop would lean further into more Warriors of Chaos, expanding what they look like, expanding how they work, expanding the range. At the time, around 1985, there was even a letter in the Citadel Journal that had something to say about that expanded influence. Dear Citadel, what is this unnatural taint of chaos that has swept the Citadel ranges? Warriors of Chaos and Chaos Beastmen I can handle, but all of a sudden I see Chaos Clerics, Fighters, Wizards, and all manner of horrors. As the mighty, fearless leader of a dwarf army, I'm finding all this chaotic opposition pretty heavy going. So how about some reinforcement for the dwarfs? Yours, Disgruntled Iron Fist. Worry not, my disgruntled friend. We have plans to release a new range of dwarfs as soon as possible. Chaos Dwarfs. Returning to that 2013 Brian Ansell interview at the Realm of Chaos 80s, he reflects again on the origins and place of Chaos Warriors in Games Workshop history. From the beginning, Chaos Warriors were established as a really important part of the Warhammer landscape. Those early models, drawn by John and sculpted by Michael and Alan, found a special place in the hearts of gamers and collectors. They always sold very well. We went on to make huge quantities of different Chaos models over the years. So, when much later we had the opportunity to produce big, lavishly over-illustrated, chart-packed hardback books, Chaos was the obvious first subject. I think that the reason the Chaos Warrior is just so good and such a great villain for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k even, is that they represent this primal fear. They are humanity at its worst, but also in a way at its best, the greatest warriors, fully committed to doing the darkest deeds. They've devoted themselves to the base instincts of humanity, and they will use all of their incredible power to destroy everything. It's such an interesting juxtaposition of ideas, and obviously the expanded Chaos Pantheon would play into what the Chaos Warriors could become later on. But even from the beginning, the warrior all dressed in black armor who looks on and ready to destroy everything in its path is just a perfect visual. We see it with Frazetta's Death Dealer. We see it with the Kurgan in Highlander. And we see it on the tabletop from the very beginning of Warhammer. A fantastic villain, a fantastic faction, and I'm not surprised at all that they've stood the test of time. There is, of course, a ton more history to the Warriors of Chaos and how they evolved The Realm of Chaos releases and 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy would do a huge amount to change and mutate what the Chaos Warriors were and how they would work, and really create the faction that we would go on to start recognizing more and more. They would then be split out from the Warbands of Chaos and become their own distinct faction, get their own distinct heroes, as later editions moved forward and changed the Warhammer world itself. I will definitely be returning to Warriors of Chaos at some point. I don't know when. There's plenty more Chaos-related content to come, and we will find a way to get back to these guys. The Realm of Chaos itself is going to be a feature one day on the channel. If you would like to support the work I do here to help me get to that place where I can cover off all of that awesome history, then feel free to check out my Patreon via the link in the description below. You get early and exclusive content, regular updates, access to my Discord, and a monthly giveaway through to the end of the year. This month, I'm giving away Cursed City goodies, so go and check that out if you're interested in that. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. I also know for sure that one of these days I'm going to make a video about the first amongst the Chaos Warriors, the greatest of their number, their most brilliant champion. I'm going to make a video about Caleb Dark.